At 10:15 a.m. on July 18, 1989, a lethal structural anomaly was enacted in West Hollywood. Rebecca Schaeffer, a 21-year-old actress poised on the verge of a major film career, answered the buzzer of her ground-floor apartment. She was awaiting a professional courier delivering script pages. Instead, she encountered a stranger in a yellow shirt, clutching a VHS cassette and an autograph book. This man, Robert John Bardo, had traveled hundreds of miles, having already failed to breach the security of her professional studio. The exchange was polite but firm, lasting less than 2 minutes. She set a clear boundary and closed the door, believing the trespass was over. 15 minutes later, when the buzzer rang again, the same man stood there. This time, he raised a gun and shot her once in the chest at point-blank range. The core paradox of this crime is not the question of the individual's motive, but the failure of every surrounding system to connect the distinct, documented data points of danger into a coherent threat structure that could have intercepted him. The casual acceptance of televised proximity forms the first layer of vulnerability, prompting curiosity about the precise moment normal fan appreciation inverts into criminal entitlement. Rebecca Schaeffer's early success was rooted in her authenticity. She grew up in Portland, Oregon, the daughter of social workers, and carried a warmth that was naturally accessible. Her defining role as Patty Russell on the CBS sitcom My Sister Sam established an endearing, familiar character beamed directly into millions of homes. For the healthy majority of viewers, this connection remained comfortably parasocial, an appreciation of a professional performance. For the disturbed minority, however, the constant broadcast of her image functioned as a dangerous invitation, blurring the line between scripted presence and personal reality, which the perpetrator immediately exploited. This blurring established a profound moral and societal implication in her rising visibility. While the entertainment industry required her to project approachability to thrive, this manufactured warmth rendered her dangerously exposed to individuals unable to maintain emotional boundaries. The sheer volume of fan mail, managed impersonally by publicists, often meant genuine admiration was filed indiscriminately alongside the obsessive and the unstable. This routine industry practice treated all inbound communication as a single category, creating a systemic oversight that prioritized scale over security and enabling the unseen danger to travel unflagged through the standard channels of a publicist's mailbox.
Before we go on, a small favor, please subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. Thank you, and let's continue with the story.
Rebecca's personal life and career choices, though ordinary, were set against an internal fantasy that Bardo had constructed, representing a total reversal of roles. He was a lonely, psychologically troubled young man from Tucson, Arizona, who spent endless hours viewing her on television. The consistency of her scripted character became the only reliable emotional fixture in his life. For him, her television persona was not acting. It was evidence of a pure, perfect moral state that he felt was intrinsically linked to his own salvation. This belief system, built entirely within his head and projected onto a stranger, was the foundation for the psychological ownership that led to his actions. The industry's oversight in handling this psychological threat became a critical individual and institutional error. When Bardo sent his first letters, he received a standard, pre-signed photo, a common practice designed for efficiency. He immediately interpreted this routine transaction not as a generic fan response, but as irrefutable evidence of a personal, exclusive bond, initiating the first stage of his entitlement. Healthy fans feel gratitude for a response. The stalker feels validation, transforming a public figure's life into a private matter that he now assumes a role in. This moment marked the pivot from passive admiration to active, deluded claim, which the existing security frameworks were utterly blind to. Bardo's fixation intensified, with his correspondence escalating in volume and shifting in tone to possessive demands for her moral perfection, providing controlled uncertainty for how such obsessions operate. This insistence on his target's moral flawlessness is a dangerous predictive pattern. It establishes an impossible standard that the real person must inevitably fail, providing the aggressor with the moral justification for his resulting rage and demands for punishment. His family noted the physical manifestation of his obsession, including her pictures covering his walls and her name scrawled on the pavement outside their house, a physical declaration of his need to claim her territory even from hundreds of miles away. The documented history of Bardo's behavior, including prior fixations on and travel toward other young actresses, represented a complete systemic inversion. Each incident was handled in isolation by separate security teams and law enforcement agencies across different jurisdictions. Because no single entity possessed the full dossier of his attempts and his increasing geographical determination, a clear pattern of escalating violent trespass was effectively fragmented into a series of harmless, disconnected nuisances. This failure of cross-communication and centralized threat recognition allowed a demonstrable, known danger to remain functionally invisible, clearing the path for his ultimate action. This rising psychological pressure converged with a crucial environmental and situational constraint when Rebecca starred in the dark comedy scenes from the class struggle in Beverly Hills. The movie included a brief love scene that, while an ordinary professional commitment, completely shattered Bardo's carefully constructed fantasy of her angelic purity. This event served as the necessary trigger for his delusion to violently collapse. In his mind, she had become corrupted, a betrayal of the promise she never made. He immediately translated his disappointment into furious moral condemnation. The subsequent escalation from personal disappointment to violent moral condemnation is the next step in the psychological mechanics of obsession. His letters became noticeably angrier, railing against Hollywood and detailing his sense of betrayal against expectations she never agreed to fulfill. When a near stranger reacts with such rage to normal, independent adult choices, career moves, relationships, or social presentation, it is never about the target's behavior. It is entirely about the assailant's overriding need to maintain and control a static, imaginary version of the woman inside his head, demonstrating that the object is more important than the person.
Before we go on, a small favor. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. Thank you, and let's continue with the story.
The studio successfully averted one crisis, but failed to alert the victim, marking a critical individual and institutional error. Bardo traveled to Los Angeles, presenting himself at the Warner Brothers lot where her sitcom had been filmed, carrying a sign and a stuffed animal, and attempting to talk his way past the gates. Studio security stopped him and turned him away. A guard remembered him as odd, but not violent. This was a critical near miss where an institutional barrier functioned correctly. Yet the system possessed no mechanism to flag him across town, no database to connect this failed encounter to the stream of obsessive fan letters, and no protocol to issue an explicit warning to the person he sought. Denied access to the professional space, Bardo's only recourse was to breach her private life. He returned to Tucson, where he hired a private investigator for a small fee, which led to a catastrophic insight into security vulnerabilities. The investigator utilized the state's Department of Motor Vehicles. At the time, DMV records were carelessly treated as public data, meaning a simple request and a plausible reason allowed a stranger to easily obtain a license record that included her current private home address. This combination of high public visibility, a subjective sense of entitlement, and the ease of access to her private governmental data created the direct, unrestricted path to her front door. The danger was not a sudden, random event, but the inevitable consequence of a system that prioritized administrative convenience over personal security. As she spoke to family and friends about ordinary matters on the evening of July 17th, the moral and societal implication was that she operated under a fundamental misconception of safety. There is no evidence she spent that night consciously fearing a particular stalker, an essential piece of controlled uncertainty that defies modern expectations of hypervigilance. No restraining orders were in place because there was no centralized system tracking his pattern of movement and intent. She was focused on her career, structured around the script pages that were supposed to arrive the next morning. The most lethal danger did not come from a volatile relationship or a professional rival, but from a stranger who had methodically rehearsed their interaction for years entirely within his own mental landscape. The events of the next morning were dictated by this structural failure, creating an undeniable anomaly. Around 10:15 a.m., when the buzzer sounded, the man identified himself as a fan. She opened the door, a brief conversation followed, and she established a clear boundary. "Please don't come to my home again." She executed the correct move, firm politeness, and closed the door, assuming the encounter was concluded. This attempted boundary setting was the moment where the conflict became fatal, directly due to the perpetrator's individual and institutional error in perception. The psychological mechanics of the obsessive mind immediately translated that polite boundary into an agonizing public rejection. A healthy individual retreats in embarrassment. The obsessive, feeling personally injured and entitled, immediately translates that boundary into a reason to escalate the conflict. Bardo walked away from the apartment building and into a nearby diner, where witnesses later noted him sitting down and methodically taking out the handgun he had brought from Arizona to load it. He spent a deliberate period preparing the weapon before walking back to her address. This short, public walk back to the apartment with a loaded weapon in his possession represented the final systemic inversion of security. He was physically present in the public sphere, prepared for homicide, yet no one intervened because no system possessed the ability to connect his ordinary appearance to his lethal, rehearsed intent. When he rang the buzzer a second time, Rebecca likely assumed the courier or a forgotten item. She opened the door and he raised the weapon he had prepared minutes earlier. He fired a single shot directly into her chest, and she collapsed back into the apartment with a scream, pronounced dead shortly after at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The entire lethal sequence, from the first ring to the time of death, consumed less than an hour, demonstrating a severe moral and societal implication. The speed with which a long-rehearsed plan can execute, proving that danger sometimes does not announce itself through a slow deterioration. The system failed to protect her when she was most vulnerable. However, the resulting police investigation meticulously traced every step, providing the ultimate insight into the methodical nature of the crime. Robert John Bardo was arrested in Tucson after confessing his crime, and the subsequent trial laid out the full, tragic architecture of his obsession, providing legal closure but demanding a deeper understanding of the future vector of such crimes. Prosecutors demonstrated a deliberate sequence of planning: the gun purchase, the prior studio attempts, the hiring of the private investigator, and the illegal procurement of her private address via the DMV records. While the conviction of first-degree murder provided formal justice, the more crucial element was the exposure of how the surrounding institutional systems had facilitated his access, rendering her tragically accessible. This case immediately exposed the fundamental anomaly of data privacy, forcing a complete overhaul of legislative thought. The ease with which Bardo obtained her address could no longer be dismissed. California swiftly passed new privacy laws, but the lasting legal impact was the Federal Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which fundamentally restricted how personal information from vehicle records could be sold or shared across the entire nation. This was a direct, life-saving response to the catastrophic failure in her case. The passage of one of the nation's first comprehensive anti-stalking laws in California was a critical systemic inversion born directly from Rebecca's experience. Before, law enforcement was often powerless to act without an overt physical threat or completed assault. Behaviors like persistent, unwanted contact or repeatedly showing up at a residence were dismissed as nuisances. Her murder forced lawmakers to legally acknowledge that stalking is not harmless persistence. It is a clear, predictable sequence of behaviors that must be treated as evidence of an accelerating threat, providing law enforcement and victims with the curiosity to act earlier. The subsequent analysis of the psychological mechanics involved provides a clear pattern for personal recognition. Visibility, the target becomes known. Fixation, the perpetrator singles her out. Entitlement, he demands time and response. Boundary testing, unwanted contact increases. Escalation, boundary setting results in rage or demands. Access breach, he finds the location. And confrontation, the final, forced interaction. The victim's actual documented efforts at security, including environmental and situational constraints such as unlisted phone numbers and privacy protocols, were completely bypassed by the single, easily exploited vulnerability of the DMV records. This reversal shows that the highest quality physical security is useless against a systemic failure of data protection. The tragic end to her life compelled society toward an insight that provides cognitive mastery over the fear of the unseen. The danger is no longer an ambiguous shadow. It is a clearly defined, documented sequence. The final, enduring moral and societal implication is the necessity of granting cultural permission to act on the discomfort that arises from unwanted, persistent attention. A stranger's obsession is not an obligation to be managed politely. It is verifiable data that requires immediate intervention. The final piece of controlled uncertainty lies in the police reports that later detailed notes in Bardo's belongings referencing other actresses he had followed. He was not exclusively obsessed with Rebecca Schaeffer. She was simply the one whose path intersected with his delusion's timeline at the moment he decided to act. Her death thus serves as an ongoing warning. The mechanism that turned celebrity fandom into fatal personal access has been exposed, documented, and named. Once the pattern is made visible, visibility, fixation, entitlement, boundary testing, escalation, it becomes an identifiable hazard. Trust the cold, objective reading of that data, and do not wait for the confrontation. All interpretations are based on publicly available information. This content does not make medical or diagnostic claims, nor does it speculate beyond established evidence.
If you'd like to keep exploring cases like this, there's another one waiting for you on screen. I think you'll find it meaningful. Click on it, and thank you for watching.